Welcome to the Progression Health Podcast. I'm here with Simon Vasey. Simon, do you want to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, hello guys. So my name's Simon Vasey. I'm a PE teacher currently living in London. I've been running for 5-6 years now.
Very good. So you're in the running mecca, from what I hear. London's pretty good spot for running.
Honestly, the amount of runners, if you go out for a run at any time, there'll be someone running. It's crazy, especially Battersea Park. I was there this morning, and it's honestly, so many runners around.
Does that make it easier to run, like that you feel a part of a community?
For sure, yeah. And also, in a weird way, it also makes you train like a little bit better, especially if you're running around Battersea. Like I did my intervals the other day around Battersea, and because there was other runners there, I was blowing quite hard because the session was quite hard, and I didn't really want to make me stop because I was with other runners. So yeah, definitely for sure.
So there's a bit of accountability with the group.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I've been part of a club as well before, and running with people definitely pushes you that a little bit more as well. I'd probably say it almost gives you an extra 10% when you're running with people, which is what you need. That's why in race day it's important to stay with a pack and stuff, and definitely helps.
Absolutely, yeah. That accountability, community, just being with so many other people, it's contagious, that energy. So you started running 5 or 6 years ago. So did you have a history or?
So I've always been into sport and always been very active, and obviously that was the reason why I chose my profession as a PE teacher. So it's funny you say this because when I saw that question, I looked at my first Strava run and then my first Strava run was in 2017, and it's my stepdad that got me to running because he was doing a marathon and a half marathon and stuff, and I was like, I wonder what it's like to run a half marathon. So I signed up for my first race. And some listeners might think, oh, he did that in his first race. So I did 1:38 in my first race in 2017. Wow. And then I thought, right, I wanted to sign up for a marathon. So then I did a marathon, Bournemouth Marathon in 2017, which I did in 4:29, which I guess shows you that I watched a video the other day. It shows that you can sort of blag a marathon. So you can sort of blag a half marathon if you've got a certain fitness level. But the marathon, it sort of catches you out a little bit if you haven't done the training and you haven't put in the miles. And so that really opened my eyes. Actually, wow, running is actually really hard. And it is such a hard sport. And I'm not trying to be big-headed, but since then, my pace for that run for the marathon was 6:19 per Ks. And this year I did a 100K race and my average pace was 6:06 per K. So it just showed, when I thought that, it just blew my mind because the marathon was so hard, but now I can my performance has gone on since then so much just from running consistently. So yeah, it's just mental how quickly your body can adapt
once you put in the years. So with that half time, that's a really good first time. So did you have much training done to get that fast of a time?
So I again, I looked at because I didn't know how else I would record it. I didn't have a watch. I think I just had my phone and stuff, and I was going out for like 3K runs, like at 4:30 pace, and I honestly had no clue what I was doing. Even on the race day, I didn't even have a watch. So I was like asking runners what sort of pace we were going at. And when they answered it, I didn't even know what that sort of pace was anyway. So I was almost just running on feel, which sounds stupid now because I would never ever do that because I've got to do all the watches and stuff. So I guess I just had fitness from football and other sports, had that sort of base fitness.
Yeah, that would definitely help. But a full then you get found out. So obviously a full is double the distance of a half, but how much harder would you say it is? Because I don't think it, in my opinion, and I haven't run a full yet, but I'm anticipating it's around 20% harder. But how much harder does it feel?
Yeah, I would say when I did the marathon, obviously I did the half, so I knew I could run a half. But my first half was in like 2:05, I think it was. And I just slowed. I just got to like 25k, and I just blew up completely. I was walking most of the way. My legs were cramping. Um, my longest run was 21k before that marathon, so I got massively caught out. And yeah, from then I was like, wow, you can't underestimate the marathon distance. It's even now like a half is, again, I don't want to sound big headed, but a half now is fairly straightforward and easy. But to run, once you go over the halfway distance, think about you have to run that again. There's not really any, because the 10k you can. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's a completely different ball game.
You're you're putting in double the work, but from from a worse starting point.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, so that really that really threw me off, and I wasn't expecting it to be that hard, to be honest with you.
But you got it done, and walking is a part of it as well. So that was great.
Yeah,
And
for sure, for sure. And even though I was walking, there was people cheering me on, and other runners as well pushing me on to make me run, which is good.
absolutely, yeah. To try and do it on your own. All your training on
Yeah,
your own or set a PR
yeah,
on your own it's the hard way. So
yeah,
how I found you is through YouTube and through your YouTube channel. So
yeah, yeah.
you had a video. Is it possible to run one marathon or is it possible to go from one marathon to 50 marathons in a year? So that
Yeah.
sounds crazy. I don't know how anyone would ever think that's even possible. So do
Yeah.
you want to just tell me the backstory to that, how you came upon that goal and
So,
how it went?
so I did my first marathon at my uni town, where I went to university, 2017. 2018, I was graduating, and to be honest, I was just a little bit lost. I had a job, I got a job lined up for the next year, but I sort of was, yeah, a bit of lost what I was going to do in my life once I've left university, and what I was, if I didn't really have any goals, didn't really have aspirations. I was like, you know what, let's use that as a platform and try and do something, to raise money for charity. Because I was a volunteer at Samaritans in 2000, and was volunteering for Samaritans 2017, and then I thought I'd raise some money for Samaritans, and that was where this idea came along. It was a late night at about 12 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock in the morning, um, and yeah, I just was planning out. I was going to do 60 marathons at first, but that seemed too much. Then I brought it down to 40 marathons. Actually, no, it was 30 marathons, 20 halves in 50 weeks. But I
And,
was
and just at this
throughout
point,
the.
how many halves and fulls had you done before
So
actually deciding this?
I'd done two halves and one marathon. Um, and honestly, even before the 50, I didn't really do any training, which is it's just stupid. Like thing, but I would never recommend anyone do that now. And even myself, like to not do really any training for any of it was just sounds stupid. And I was like going out for like 10k runs and 15k runs, but not anything like long distance. Um, so the first one uh, was Farnham, like a trail marathon. It took me like 5 hours 45 minutes, and then the week after I had another one at Goodwood Motor Circuit, which was 8 laps. Again, took me 5 hours 30. So the plan was, to use them as a. I didn't do any training because I was like, I'm going to use them as the training run. Does that make sense? And hopefully I would get quicker, which I did. Um, so yeah,
Did you go slower than your very first full? So your very
yeah.
first
So
full
I
was
was,
4.
so as in, sorry, did my run slower? Does that make sense? Or
Your very first full was 4 hours, I think you said, and then
4:29, 4:29.
the next two
Um,
were 5.
like 5 hours 45, 5 hours 30. Um,
So was that a bit
I think I did.
discouraging to go? a bit slower than you
Oh,
had
for
planned?
sure. But then I was like, I was almost, obviously for my ego, I was almost a little bit like, oh, I've done it quite slow compared to other people. But I was like, in the bigger grand scheme of things, I was actually running every week because I was going slower because I had to run the next week, and it almost seemed a little bit hard to try and do one marathon then a marathon next. I was like, I'm going to take it real slow. Yeah.
You kind of had no other option if you're doing that many
Oh,
races.
yeah, yeah, for
So
sure.
work to your advantage.
Yeah. I was just thankful for the halves because the halves come round like I think I did like for the first few it was like a marathon, half, marathon, half. Um, so when the halves come around, I was like so thankful, especially that first 5 6 weeks.
So in between the fulls, the halves, what were you doing
Yeah,
running wise? How many runs were you doing?
none. Um, Maybe I did a little 3K in the week occasionally, but usually nothing in the week. Um, and luckily I didn't have any injuries. There was one occasion where I had a really bad knee, um, probably because of overuse, and it was halfway through the marathon. It was my fifth event. Um, Obviously, I knew I had another 45 to go, and I was thinking I've released this to my Instagram, the whole world. They know I'm doing it, and I'm going to fail on the fifth attempt. But luckily, it just went away. So I was really fortunate at that, and then no injuries ever since. So which is really good.
So it sounds as though you kind of had a reasonable approach to it where you're like, I'm not going to PR every time. And you
Yeah,
kept the mileage low, so you're able to stick with it.
yeah,
But there
yeah.
was one race in particular you talked about you were crying at the end, I think.
Yeah. So I did this. I did the ultra. So I did because at one point I was 6 weeks behind schedule. Um, I flew to Malta and it had the worst storm and the marathon got cancelled. So I was 6 weeks behind and I did this double marathon at Brecon Beacons.
Two in one
And
day.
it was, yeah, two in one day.
Wow.
And I think it was like, it was near the end, but it was honestly the hardest race I've done. It was blowing, it was like one of the worst storms in August. And it was blowing so hard, like they had to stop us climbing the last climb because it was so windy, and it took me 15 hours. I was running in the dark on my own for quite a while, and yeah, it was miserable. But yeah, I think probably the highlight of that was the first time I broke sub 4 Manchester, um, and yeah, that was all from just I guess running a certain amount of distance each week, just doing a marathon each week. I just suddenly got quicker. Um, and it didn't. That was the third. I think that was number 29. So it took me 29 attempts to get to that sub 4, just from running a marathon or half marathon each week.
The
Obviously on tired legs,
the
but
persistence to keep going is amazing though. Like just to set a crazy goal and to stick with it. So
yeah.
what about the halftime? Was the halftime coming down as well at the same time?
And to be honest, no, the halftime was going up, if anything. Um, so I think I did my third one was Cheltenham half, and it took me 1:36. And then from there on, the halves would just go around like 1:40, 1:44. Um, Obviously, because I was just, it wasn't really probably training the right way, wasn't doing the speed work, was overtired. So yeah,
And were you raising a lot of money that you're able to keep going
so
all the time, or what was the motivation? Because you're seeing some progress, but not a huge amount. So it sounds really challenging.
yeah, the motivation was because I was actually I was gaining a little bit of money. I think I got like raised 6.5 grand in the end. Probably could have raised it more. But yeah, I guess the people that are following me on my Instagram and stuff, and that sort of kept me going as well. My family, um, my friends coming to watch me at events and stuff. So all them sort of things combined just kept me going and kept me motivated. And to be honest, I loved like traveling across the country and going abroad to different races. I just loved it. It was probably one of the best years of my life, I'd say. It was just so fun. Met so many different people. Done some terrible races, some great races.
Understandably so. You're doing so many. So with each race, were you preparing like, I'm going to PR, or would you kind of set it up where you're like, right, this course, it's not going to be good PR on?
Good question. Yeah. So I'd say any laps, I was just saying I was not going to PR. I was just going to any lap courses. So there was one where you go out and back, like 7 or 8 times. And when it was something like that, I was like, right, I'm not going to PR. Let's just get this one done. For example, the big marathons like the Brighton Marathon, London Marathon, Manchester Marathon, Copenhagen Marathon, all them sort of ones, I was just going out thinking, right, I'm just going to try and run as best as I can, try and get that time down. And that kept me motivated. I think that also, because I'm so like goal orientated, I think that obviously helps me now when I'm training. And I think that's why I like sort of chasing times a little bit. This 50 and 50 experience made me realize that I actually got like seeing how far my body can go and how much I can train and how much I can improve as an athlete, I guess.
And for anybody listening, would you recommend that advice to anyone listening of, if it's a lap course, to not try and PR on that? Or what was your thinking there? Because it sounds a bit easier, if anything.
It's a good question now, because obviously I run laps around Battersea, but to be honest, if someone said to me they're a new runner and they said, "Oh, do you recommend doing a lap course where you just do 8 laps like Battersea?" I'd probably say no, not as your first one. Do something where there's a bit of a crowd, so that keeps you going. Do one where there's a big group of runners as well, because that also massively helps. Whereas some of the lap courses I was doing, there was maybe 30, 40 runners. So yeah, I wouldn't probably recommend that for other people. Maybe when you're a bit more experienced and it's a flat course like Battersea or something like that, then yeah.
Yeah, save your big races for the actual big races where there's kind of a strength in numbers, pack mentality.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
So from start to finish, how much did your time improve?
So obviously, I think I got down to my 49th event. I went out to Reykjavik and in Iceland, and I did 3:52, and that was the quickest I got. And then my last event was the Great North Run, which was like 1:44, I think. So yeah, that was my quickest one.
And what was the biggest takeaways from that? Because you did a serious amount of running, you must have learned a few different things about yourself and running in general.
Yeah, so in terms of running wise, starting off slow and finishing strong, because I always used to probably go off a little bit too quick and then I'd pay for it towards the end, and then I'd start off slow and finish quite strong. So I remember doing I think it was that race. I did a 2:02 first half, and my second half was like I don't know, I can't remember the map, 1:54 or something like that. Or no, it must have been quicker. It must have been like 1:50 or 1:48 or something like that. So I learned that quite early on, which has definitely helped me moving forward. In terms of myself, I guess I just realised I'm very resilient, and even though my body was really hurting at some points, I was just trying to get to that finish line and keep moving one foot in front of the other, I guess. So yeah, I guess that sort of instilled maybe this marathon running is for me, because I sort of don't really quit, which made me realise that.
Absolutely, yeah. You learned how strong you really were by doing something so difficult.
Yeah, and then it also, like, in your daily life, it makes other things seem not that hard. I know that sounds a bit like cheesy, but it makes some things a little bit easier because you know how hard something else is. If that makes sense.
Yeah, if you've got a marathon coming up at the end of the week, the little issue during the week is hardly going to compare, I'd imagine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
How could you get worked up over the little thing at work when the marathon, 4 hour run?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So something that I did my most recent half marathon is the same as you: start off slow, finish fast. But I kind of
Yeah.
feared that I saved too much. Do you ever find that?
I've done that a few times actually. And there was one occasion recently when I did 10K race, and it was the 5K runners and the 10K runners start at the same time. Um, and I'm not about like finishing first, second, third, fourth, but I was at that point where I didn't know whether I was leading, didn't know whether I was finished, whether I was second or not. Um, but I had my goal that I was going to start off at 3:30 pace per K, and see where that took me. And I got to about 7K feeling really strong. And my last like 3K, I was doing like 3:08, 3:07, 3:02, and I was thinking I've gone off way too slow here. So yeah, I have made mistake of doing that in the past for sure. But I'd rather do that because there's the feeling of taking over other runners rather than you getting overtaken is so much better. From a salvage point of view, it makes you feel like you're actually gaining ground, and that even spurs you on even more, if that makes sense.
I was going to say it's a very good problem to have, to know you could have done a little bit more. It's
Yeah.
way too easy to burn yourself out. Even in the Boston Marathon, I think there's a runner, Des Linden. She actually won the Boston Marathon. I think it was in New York, actually. She started off too fast, and it was a hot day. Like, so even pros do it. So what do you think it is that people start off too fast? And let's just say somebody's approach is like, I don't care what Simon says. I'm going hell for leather. I'm going 100% to start. What would you say to someone like that based on the experience you've had?
I guess I would try to advise them not to, because you definitely will pay for it 100%. Especially when you get that part over that, because I wouldn't say the race in a marathon, as you've probably heard before, doesn't really start till 20 miles, 32K. In my head anyway, I get to that 32K and I was like, even though 10K doesn't sound a lot, it does when your legs are hurting and your legs are burning and you can feel twinges going on in your legs. 10K is a bloody long way, especially if you have to walk. So my advice would be stay patient, be patient. Early on, the first 2K, I always take my foot off the gas just a little bit. So maybe like 10 seconds slower than my marathon pace, or 5 seconds slower than my marathon pace, just to relax into the race, if that makes sense. But I would highly recommend just easing off a little bit in that first 5K.
Absolutely, yeah. You're just reminding me, we had Matt Crean on. He's a pro runner in England, and he won the Manchester Marathon. And he sometimes would actually start going 100%, trying to lead from the front, burn people out. And he's trying to work on that even himself. So
really?
So it's so common.
He found that he was trying to, because he was in contention of winning, he went out too fast and would pay for it in the end, or?
Yeah, I think his background is in the shorter distances, so he's used to going faster. So his approach was try and lead from the front and get up a big gap, and then slow towards the end, but be so far ahead that people it's almost like psychological, trying to like get under people's skin a bit, I think, and sort of, just lock up the race early. But
yeah, for sure. And I think one thing I've learned from, obviously now, I never thought I'd be in I never thought I'd be a runner where I'd be competing as such, like in smaller races. But it's so much better being chasing rather than being chased, if that makes sense. If you're in contention of leading or winning, or there's something about chasing the other person in front of you is something a bit more challenging about that.
Yeah, because like you said about having a goal, it's something to aim for. Even in my most recent long run there recently, on the very last rep at a 5-minute sub-threshold pace rep, a cyclist just happened to come into my view. So I started tailing the cyclist, and it pulled me along so much further than I would have gone. Whereas if you're running on your own, leading from the front, I find that is not as enjoyable because you kind of don't know where to push, where to pull. Whereas if you have something in front of you like a goal, it's just that feedback right there and then as you need it. So I would definitely be an advocate for your approach as well.
For sure.
So another really good video you had on the YouTube channel was your top 10 tips for training and running a marathon. So I thought that was brilliant. I watched that before my most recent half, and I'll be watching it again.
Cheers.
What were the what was the inspiration for that, and what were your best tips from that?
I guess, okay, I'm trying to think of all 10 of them now, but I guess the inspiration behind just the YouTube was just trying to share some of my experiences from maybe having literally no experience, not even wearing a watch, to breaking sub 3 and getting close to that London Championship time. I guess I wanted to share some of my experiences and help people that maybe not as experienced and wanted some help with running. I just thought I'd break it down to marathon tips that help me train and ones that I use on race day as well. The one I stand by most is, and I'll give to anyone who's training for a marathon, is never skip your long run. The long run is the most important one. And I think that is the one I'd tell anyone if they ask me what's your most important tip. Never skip long run. It's just so important, and it just gives you a massive confidence boost when you approach race day, knowing that you've done the distance. You can run that far for that period of time. So that is the most important one for me.
Absolutely. I just read Hal Higdon's book. It's on half marathons, but he discusses fulls as well, and he actually said the exact same thing. The long run is the most important, and it's where you really build up that fitness that you need to get that experience. So what's the longest run you do in your training blocks in preparation for a full?
So my approach has actually changed. Before I broke the sub 3, my approach has changed slightly. So when I was chasing the sub 3 hours for the marathon, I was thinking, right, I need to do 38k, 39k. So I think my longest run was like 37, 38k with maybe 3 times 5k or 4 times 5k marathon pace. I think something like that. 3 times 6k marathon pace, I think it was, with like 1k floats in between. 36k. But now since I've had a new coach and got a new coach, I've actually been running like 33k, 34k as my longest run before the marathon, just because my mileage is more overall over the week, rather than before. Maybe my mileage was slightly lower than what I'm doing now. I'd say 34k is a good amount for someone who's got a bit more experience in the marathon distance. I understand why people would 100% do longer, because it gives you that massive confidence boost knowing that you can run the distance. So when people ask me, especially on that YouTube video, the top 10 tips, what's the longest run you did? What do you recommend me doing? I always say, like, for sure, do the 37 a couple of times, so you know that you're confident, you know that you can do the distance. But I tell them what session I like doing and stuff. And then my favorite session is probably 7 times 3k with 1k float in between, or marathon alternatives. So like 1k under your marathon pace, 1k at steady, 1k under for 10 times.
Yeah, pretty brutal stuff, but that's what's required to get that 3. So how many miles do you think, and I know mileage isn't the best way to look at it, but what do you think is required? You just give it a sense of what's required to run sub 3 hours roughly, in terms of weekly runs and mileage.
I think it all depends on the person, but I think probably during that, when I first did the sub 3, I was consistently running maybe 70 to 80 Ks a week with maybe a peak week of 90K, or maybe my peak was 85. I can't remember. It was around that mark, 85, 90K mark of a peak week. But now I approach it as being consistent throughout the whole block. So 80K weeks, 90K weeks, peak maybe 100K week. But my level would always be 80K, 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 and then maybe during the peak weeks dip up a little bit and then come back down. But I reckon, yeah, around that ball mark figure, I reckon 70 to 90K, I think. Yeah.
So you try at the start of the block to start high and just kind of maintain a high weekly mileage. Is that it?
Yeah. So I think that's why I'm really struggling this block, because I've obviously been running 30K and then suddenly, which also I know a lot of people would not recommend going from 30K to 70K, but I did. So I went from 30K to 70K, and then I've been maintaining that roughly for about 4 weeks. I'm now up to about 90. I think my last was 95K my last week. So I think that's why these last 3 weeks have been really, really tough. But
so I can imagine some people saying, "Oh, but this is what's required. You know, I got my goal. I want to do sub 3, and this is just. It should be hard. You know, it should be difficult. But why would you advise against it, Tony, on listening, to go from 30 to 70?
Just because if you're not used to that mileage, that's how you're going to get injured. I sort of was used to that mileage a couple of months ago, because I was training for a marathon, training for a 100K race. So my body's just used to it, and I think it probably can adapt quicker maybe than a runner that's less experienced. And I know what my body can now take, if that makes sense. So if you're not as experienced and you go from 30K to 70K, I think you probably maybe get injured or overtired, overtrain, which is not going to be useful especially when you've got such a big chunk of marathon training.
Yeah, the training, not to be cringy, but it is a marathon, not a sprint. You got to stick with it.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with like motivation? Is there times where the motivation fluctuates?
Yeah. So I think 16 weeks is quite a long period of time for training for a marathon. So I like to split it up into try to have different goals, like running 10K, booking 10K race in. So for example, I've got my first 10K race in 3 weeks time, which is 7 weeks into my marathon block. Then I've got a half marathon, which is in October. So I think that is 10 weeks into my marathon block. And then I've got a marathon 6 weeks later. So that's how I like to break it down, because then it just gives me mini goals along the way. And then I can obviously see from them races where my fitness is at and what sort of times I'm looking at for that marathon. Because I think the races do help you really indicate what sort of time you're gonna do. And yeah, if you're not hitting near your PBs, then you need to sort of change your training a little bit, maybe add a bit more interval with a bit more threshold work. So yeah, it is handy.
So when you do these smaller races in the build-up, what's your kind of your approach to them, your mindset? Are they like proper tests? You're going 100%, or do you try and hold back a little bit?
No, all fully hard, 100% efforts, proper racing. Yeah.
So if there's a PB there to hit, you're going to hit it.
Yeah. That's the aim. I'd go for my PB. I know, and I think as I've got better, I know when my body's not in PB shape, and you just get that feeling when you go out for a run, like, oh God, I feel fit, I feel really good. So I think that will come soon if I know I'm in PB shape or not for this 10K. And at the moment, I'm not feeling that great in terms of my running at the moment, just because as I've gotten quicker, the more volume I've got to add, the more intensity I've got to add to my training for such minimal gains. That's the motivation thing that I'm really struggling with at the moment. Just is it worth it? Is it worth that 2-3 minutes? So yeah, that always goes through my head, especially now. That never happened before this training block. So I'm trying to fight that negative aspect in my mind.
Yeah, you're kind of in uncharted territory in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So something I run into, and I kind of hear with other people as well who aren't experienced as yourself, is they have their goal time in mind. So for example, for me, it's sub 90 half or sub 3 hour full. The training isn't there, but they completely ignore where they're at with their training. So how do you work around that? For example, you have your goal in mind, but your training the reality, you're just not there. How do you figure that one out?
So you're saying basically your weekly training is not consistent, and you're some weeks doing more miles and some weeks doing less. I guess
focus too much on the outcome and the training isn't reflecting. You're kind of getting ahead of yourself almost.
Yeah, I guess
coach maybe.
Yeah, a coach definitely. That is where I did 324 without a coach. Then I got a coach, and my times honestly have gone skyrocketed, just because they've got more knowledge, better sessions, more detailed sessions. So I went from 324 to 309 to 258 to 246. They're my last marathon block. So for sure, a coach has massively helped me.
Did you say 309 to 258?
Yeah.
So you dropped 11 minutes in one block. Is that right?
Yeah. And that was, to be honest, I was really disappointed with that 309. I was really, really disappointed. And the reason I think I knocked so much off from 309 to 258 is because I didn't have a B goal in that 309. My aim was to get a sub 3 hour marathon, and I knew I wasn't going to get it. And I didn't have a B goal after that. And I was sort of like walking, running, and then it's like, well, I might as well just walk for a little bit. I didn't have that, right, I'm going to do it sub 305 now, and that really, I think that added minutes on for sure. So yeah, I guess, like you said, if someone's chasing a sub 3, their training's not there, just change the goalpost slightly to make that training a little bit more funner, a little bit more enjoyable. Because there's nothing enjoyable if you know that you've got a goal in your head and you know you're not going to reach it. It's just going to make the training less enjoyable. So change the goalposts and have a different goal in mind, I think.
Yeah, kind of break it down, make it easier. So you said, you know yourself, that you really like to have a goal and something to aim for. Yeah. But what about you mentioned an A and a B goal? So I know a little bit about it, but I'm not sure the listeners would. So can you kind of explain the importance of that and just how you apply it in your own training?
Sure. So for example, at the moment, my A goal is sub 240. So that will get me into the London Championship time. But obviously my B goal would then be just a PB. Any PB would be a good. So that'd be anything under 246. So I think that is just a good way of, right, if you don't get your first goal, then let's try and get the second goal, because it just keeps that motivation ticking over. And then even if you don't think you're going to have a C goal, maybe, right, I'm going to try and run as close to 246 or as close to sub 250, just to make things a little bit easier on race day as well. Because if you're race day and you have you're not feeling great, or your leg's not feeling great, you can't run as well as you can if you don't have them goals in your head. It's just, I guess it definitely does help me for sure. It just helps me with that, keep moving forward, keep trying to get to that finish line. Yeah, that spurs me on a lot.
Yeah, I'd imagine it'll really keep you accountable, especially when things don't go your way.
Especially when you've said it to, I don't know, a lot of people have Strava now, so especially if they've said it on Strava, like, right, on Malaga Marathon, the aim is sub 240. External factors also do keep you going, so like thinking about, you're right, you don't want to let, I don't know, your family down that. You've been training so hard, you've been out the house for so many hours. That also helps me. thinking about my loved ones when I'm running and stuff. That keeps me going. So having them things to draw on during the race and even during training, because you're doing so many hours, it's like sometimes it can be demoralizing if you've trained hard and then you don't get the goal you want. It is sometimes very frustrating.
Absolutely, and you feel like you're representing all your people as well. You want to do them proud.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. Yeah.
So with the goal setting, where does the coach fit into that? I imagine the coach would be useful, or do you come up with it yourself?
So I guess all the goals I had have been. I feel like I'm quite a realistic person. So like, I know that I did a 2:46. I'm not going to say right. I'm going to try and do 2:35 or something like that. So I always try and just take mini goals and but yeah, having the coach, I tell him what I want to achieve, and then he'll plan my sessions around that, which is good. And then and I tell him all the races I've got lined up as well for him to help me for the training block.
So yeah, it's kind of like that second opinion or that informed opinion to bounce your ideas off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and he also, when he does my plans, he doesn't actually put the paces on, so it's mainly down to feel. So like, I obviously now I'm more experienced. I know what pace threshold is. I know what pace tempo is. I know what pace my 5K pace should be. So it's all done on feel and how I feel, and which also helps me train as well. For example, I know that I'm nowhere near my 5K. So when he's 5K pace, so when he says do 10 times 400 meters at 5K pace, I'm like, right, well, I'm not really at my 5K fitness at the moment, but I'll try and get near it as much as possible. Which is good.
The running itself is a lot of work, so to have to do the planning as well, and to try and be objective, as opposed to like, I want to get to this goal, so I'm going to push the training harder. I imagine that's a huge help as well.
Yeah, for sure. And him giving you feedback and him making the sessions makes you accountable, like we said before, having that accountability of, sometimes I just can't be bothered to do it, and then you're like, right, actually no, I need to get out the door because I'm paying for these sessions, and also I'm not going to progress because the coach is going to I'm going to let him down, or so yeah, that honestly definitely does help.
Yeah, it's like a team effort in a way.
Yeah, for sure.
So I kind of mentioned a few times getting the 3-hour sub full. It's a big goal. How did it feel when you eventually kind of cracked it? Because you did it, like, you've done so many fulls and you didn't get it. How many did it take you, and how did it feel when you actually did it then?
So, as I mentioned before, I did Brighton 3:24, and then my next goal, I gave myself a year, so I did Brighton. Did Brighton 3:24. Then I did Brighton the next year, where I was like, right, I'm going to try and do sub 3. That is the aim. And the running was going really well. I think I did my first ever sub 1:25 half marathon, and I was thinking, right, I'm on pace here. I'm on. This could happen if my training continues. And I was so gutted I didn't make it on the 3:09. But I think that almost spurred me on. I was like, right, I'm deaf, because I really wanted to get into London for the Good for Age time. And that spurred me on massively, because I'm like, living in London, I definitely want to be there at the marathon for the next year. And then I did Frankfurt, where I nearly missed out there as well. I got to about 37K and my legs suddenly just seized up. So I was hobbling to the finish line. I think I was on for about a sub 2:54, and I finished in 2:58:39. So when I first did it, it was like, oh, I've done it, like sub 3, so good. Like I was so buzzing about it. But then like almost like it's weird, because you think, oh, now what do I do? I've finished with that training. Now what do I train for? Which is a rubbish way of looking at it. I should have just accelerated it, enjoyed the process. But then I was thinking, right, what am I going to do now? I've just dedicated 15, 16 weeks of my life, this one goal every day. And yeah, so it's a bit of a weird feeling, to be honest with you.
So it's almost like in the race itself, you need an A and a B goal, but then long term, you need an A and a B goal as well.
Yeah, yeah. So I enjoyed the training so much during that block. I enjoyed it so much. It was just a massive part of my life. And then when it went away, I was almost a little bit lost. I've got better at that now as I've ran more races since. But even when I did that 2:58, I still missed out on the London Marathon good for age time because it goes back because there were so many people that got sub 3. It went back to 2:56. So then I was like, that spurred me on even more. So then I was like, I'm definitely not missing out on it next year. So to go from 2:58 to 2:46, that was probably my best racing to date so far. Best training, best coach I've had. Yeah, for sure.
Brilliant. Yeah. So even though training is tough, it's very meaningful, very rewarding. So
yeah,
it gives a lot back.
Honestly, I love it. Like, I just love the feeling I get after a run and after I've done something hard, like a hard interval session. I just love that feeling. Like, there's nothing that for me that beats it. And I feel like I can just relax the rest of the day. I can do whatever I want. I can eat whatever I want. It just, I guess now running is part of my life, whereas before it wasn't. It was just like a side little thing I did. Sometimes we'd go out for a run, sometimes we'd just stay in. But now it's like part of my life. I know how much it makes me feel good and makes things. For example, like I went for a run the other day in the morning, and I felt so alive at work in terms of like my production levels and so I think it's so good. I'd recommend running to anyone.
Absolutely, yeah. It gives so much back, especially when you fully commit to it. So,
yeah,
Simon, this has been brilliant. Thanks so much for your time. Is there any kind of final message you want to leave people with, or links you want to let them know about, or the channel, for example?
So my YouTube channel that I've been started doing this year, last year. My first one was this year. It's Simon Says Run.